If you are a developer looking for another project for your portfolio, then this is the perfect project for you. There's a full stack voting application that comes with a lot of features that you need in a full stack application. And we are going to use the MERN Stack, that is MongoDB, ExpressJS, React.js, and NodeJS to create this entire application. Now, some of the features that this application is going to have is a fully functioning authentication system. We are going to have a dark and a light theme functionality as well. We will make sure this is responsive. The whole application is responsive, and that means we are going to make sure it looks good on all devices, and a whole bunch of other features that we are going to explore as I walk you through the demo of this application and as we create the project as well. All right, of course, we are going to have the fully functioning election. There's actually a multi-election application. Okay, so you can have plenty elections on this same application, and we are actually going to deploy this and make it available on the internet once we are done creating the application locally. All right, so let me quickly walk you through the finished project. Okay, now to participate in the election, of course, you have to sign up. You have to register in the app to be able to vote in this election. So let's go ahead and register a user here. I'm going to call this person Jane Doe. So jane@gmail.com, that will be the email. Jane123 will be the password. And we have some checks. Okay, so if I go ahead and try to register, I get filling all fields. As you can see here, this confirm password isn't filled. So we have to make sure that it's filled. Okay, so I'm going to do Jane1234. Remember, this is Jane123. Okay, so these passwords do not match. Now, if I try to register, I get passwords do not match. And these are actually coming from the API, okay, the backend, which we'll get to. So, of course, we should make sure the passwords match. So now, there's actually Jane123, same as the password itself. And now, if I go to register, I am actually registered. Okay, so Jane Doe has been actually added to my database. All right, now if I try to log in here without entering anything as well, I get this filling all fields. So jane@gmail.com, that was the email, and Jane123 was the password. All right, so now let's log in, and so far we have 2 elections. Okay, 2 brand new elections, and as you can see, we have no votes for any of the elections, so meaning nobody has voted in this election yet. Okay, so Jane is the first person to be able to vote in any of these elections. So we have 2 elections so far, and yeah, as you can see, we have Harvard presidential elections 2024, and we have Legon SRC presidential elections 2024. Okay, this election has 4 candidates, and this also have 3 candidates. Okay, so let's vote in the Harvard presidential elections. Okay, so we are here and we can see the candidates. We can go ahead and vote for Vivian. Okay, and of course we are going to confirm our votes. Now if I cancel the votes and then come back to the results page, you can see we haven't voted. Okay, so nothing is showing. As you can see, although I selected Vivian to vote for, since I didn't confirm, we were not able to vote for Vivian. Okay, so let's enter the election again and actually vote for Vivian. So here I'm going to actually confirm this vote. All right, and I get thanks for your vote. Your vote is now added to your candidate's vote count. You will be redirected shortly to see the new results, and I've been automatically redirected back to the results page. And as you can see, Vivian now has 1 vote. Okay, and so far, since we are the only, or Jane is the only person who has voted, Vivian has 100% of the votes so far. All right, now one cool thing I added was if Vivian tries to vote again, of course, she shouldn't be able to vote in that same election. Okay, so we get, you are only permitted to vote once in the selected election. Please vote in another election or sign out. Okay, so we can go back to the results page and actually vote in another election. Okay, I hope that makes sense. All right, so let's actually vote in this Legon SRC presidential elections 2024. And here I'm actually going to vote for Jackson up here menu. Okay, so of course we confirm our votes, and yeah, thanks for your vote. Your vote is now added to your candidate's vote count. Okay, and automatically within a few seconds we will be automatically redirected back to the results page, and as you can see we have one vote for Jackson. Okay, and of course if you try to vote in this particular election again, we won't be able to. Perfect. All right, now we wouldn't be able to, or Jane would not be able to add any elections. Okay, of course she can go ahead and view the details of each election. As you can see, once you click on the view, okay, if you're not an admin and you click on the view, you get the details of the election, the candidates and the voters in that particular election, and that's what you get, right? But if I go ahead and actually I'm going to log out here and sign in as achiever@gmail.com. The password is achiever123 and log in. This is actually the admin of this app. Okay, so Achiever has a lot more privileges. Achiever can go ahead and actually vote. Okay, Achiever can Achiever is a voter basically. And Achiever can also actually edit an election, add an election, add candidates in election, delete candidates, and actually delete the election as well. So Achiever has all the CRUD functionalities that come with apps like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually add a new election. Okay, I'm actually going to add a new election called let's do Stanford presidential elections 2024. And for the description, I'll just have something random here. I'm going to choose the Stanford flag, and actually, you know what, let me show you something real quick. If I show you the source code for this entire application, let's get to the server side. You can see in this uploads folder, we're actually saving the images here. Okay, now there is only a backup for the entire images that is uploaded to the app. Okay, but I'm actually pushing all the images to Cloudinary, which is a cloud storage, and then we are getting a URL back from the response we get from Cloudinary, and that is the URL for the images we use on the app. As we selected this flag 2, which is the Stanford app, you can see, or you are going to see shortly, that this is going to be uploaded in the uploads folder. Okay, so let me submit this and show you quickly. Of course, you can see that Stanford presidential elections 2024 has been added to the elections, right? But if we come here and I click this, wait a minute, flag 2, yeah, okay. So you can see that Stanford has been, or the Stanford flag has been added to the elections, okay, which is really, really cool. So I'm actually getting all these images that you see in the app. I'm getting all of them from Cloudinary, right? But I'm also saving them in the backend. Okay, I'm saving them in the project as well. So in case we have any issues with Cloudinary in the future, you can just go ahead and upload all the images that you have in the uploads folder, and your images on your app is going to be restored. All right, so Stanford presidential elections 2024, of course, since NS Achiever is logged in and is the ultimate admin, he can go ahead and actually add candidates for this election. Okay, so let's actually add some candidates for this. And I'm just going to use some random names and all that. I'm going to choose this image, and that will be our first candidate. Of course, he's been added. And actually, you know what, I'm actually going to delete this candidate just so I show you something. Okay, now let's come back to the results page, and this is our election, the election we just created, right? So if I enter, I should see this person and I can actually vote for him or her. All right, so what I wanted to show you is if I come back and actually delete this candidate, if you come here, we don't have any candidates. for this election. Okay, so if we enter that election, or if you try to vote for any person in that election, we get inactive election. There is no candidate, or there are no candidates found for this election. Okay, so I think that is a really cool feature as well. Of course, you shouldn't be able to vote in an election that has no candidates. All right, so that is just something cool that I added. So let's come back and actually add some candidates to this selection, and I'm going to do Jack Ma, just some random stuff. I'll add Michael Jackson back. Okay, yep, I'll add somebody else as well. That's Ronaldo. And lastly, I'll add one more person. Let me get the image first. What's her name? Kim? Yeah. All right, so these are the candidates for this election. Okay, and if we come back to the results page, you can see that we have that. Okay, now actually, to show you how the calculation, the loading for the different election work, since an achiever hasn't voted in any of these elections, we can actually check that out. Okay, so I'm actually going to vote for this person, Majid Michelle. Okay, we get thanks for your vote. Your vote is now added, blah, blah, blah. And we will be automatically redirected to the results page. And now we should have 50 for Vivian Gel and then 50% for Majid Michelle. That's for the load, okay? Since we have one vote here, one vote there, okay? Now, if I try to enter, we get already voted. Now, let's go ahead and actually vote for this person here as well. You get thanks for your vote, blah blah blah. So that is it for this whole application. Really, that is it for the application. Of course, for the dark theme, this is how it is looking. This is how the application is going to look like. Okay, we can actually edit the elections. Let's say most popular people in the world today, and I'm going to choose a different image. Actually, I'll just choose that same image. Okay, and I update. Now we get most popular people in the world today. Okay, that is a new title for this election. I hope that makes sense. So I think that is it for the entire application. Of course, I may have missed a few things out. Of course, we can actually go ahead. For instance, if I come here, we can actually go ahead and delete the selection. Okay, and remember, everything is being stored in our database. We have a database here that I should show you. So let me refresh this cluster and then show you the database I have here for the entire application. Okay, that is it, voting up, and you can see we have candidates collection, election collection, and a voter selection collection, right? So far we have two voters. One is an admin, I think. Yeah, we have only two voters. You can see one is an admin, one is not. And we have the vote collections, okay, which is the elections the person has voted in. We are going to have that relationship. It's almost going to be like a relational database. That's how we are going to link everything, or all the collections in the application. Okay, so this is going to be a very, very educative tutorial for you guys, and I hope you stay ready to learn more as we code along. Okay, so I can actually go ahead and delete the selection, and once I do that, every candidate in that election is going to be deleted as well. Okay, so if I go ahead and delete the selection, that election is deleted. If you come to the results page, we don't have that election again. Okay, Now let me show you how this is going to look on mobile devices. All right, so I'm just going to quickly sign up as a different user, John Doe. Come on, john@gmail.com. John. Of course, if I try to register an email that is already registered, for instance, if I try to register jane@gmail.com, remember we already have this, right? So if I try to sign that up, we get filling out fields. Of course, I'll do John123 for the passwords and try to register. We get email already exists. Okay, so that check is also in place. All right, now I'm going to do john@gmail.com. Now let's sign up, and we've been signed up. Of course, let's log in. john@gmail.com. John123. Log in, and we can go ahead and actually vote. Since John hasn't voted in this election, he can go ahead and vote. I'm going to vote for Majid Michelle. I get the thanks for your votes, blah blah blah, and I'll be automatically redirected back to the results page. There we go. And as you can see, we have 2 votes for Majid Michelle. So 33% for Vivian and 66% for Majid. Now the Shatawali has 0%. Okay, so that is it basically. Of course, if I try to vote in this election, I get already voted. Okay, yeah, so basically that's it for this entire tutorial. And of course, we can check out the other pages that we have. And since John Doe is not an admin, he is not able to delete candidates, delete election, add candidates, add election, and all that. Okay, so this is what we are going to build in this tutorial, and I hope you are ready to learn something real. And so we have a lot to do. Let's get started. Now let's go ahead and create a folder for our API or our server. That's the backend side of the project. Now the client side that we have here, or the client folder that we have here, is the React app that we created in the previous video. Okay, so now the API is what we are going to work on, the Node Express API. Okay, so go ahead and open this server folder in VS Code or whatever text editor you are going to use. And with Node.js installed on your computer, do npm init and then -y. That's inside of your server folder. Okay, I'm going to clear this. Now you can see we have package.json file here, and let's go ahead and install some dependencies that we need for this project. So npm install, of course we need Express since there's a Node Express API. We need Mongoose since we are going to communicate with MongoDB. We need course, and then we need .env. Okay, so let's install these packages. Of course, we are going to install more packages as we work on the project, but for now, these are the main packages that we need for the project to actually start. Okay, so if we take a good look at the dependencies, we have 4 so far, and in case you get the source code and you're having any issues, just come to the package.json and make sure you install these exact dependencies. Okay, and you will not have any issues with the project. That's if you're going to get the source code. All right, now let's create index.js file here and then bring in some of the packages that we just installed. We are going to bring in Express, so let's require Express. I'll duplicate this twice. We need course, of course, coming from course, and then we need, I'm going to bring in connect from Mongoose. Okay, instead of bringing the whole Mongoose, I only need this connect method. All right, now for .env, I'll just do require .env and config. Okay, our configure is right there at the top. All right, so let's instantiate our Express app. So we do app, and that's going to be equal to our Express that we have. And so I'll do app.use express.json since we are going to send some requests using JSON. I'll do extended and set it to true. I'll duplicate this. Come on, duplicate. Okay, and URL encoded is going to be extended true as well. Now I'll do app.use again, and this is going to be course. Now with course, I'll set credentials to be true, and origin is going to be an array. Okay, now basically we are just giving permission to some domains that should communicate with the API. Okay, now the first domain that we need is going to be our React, the local React app. Okay, so I'm actually going to put it in an array. You have our local host 3000. Okay, if you can remember, that's the port that we used for the React application. And once we are done with the entire application and we deploy, we are going to add the domain of the client side here as well. Okay, so it's going to be here as well. I hope that makes sense. But for now, this is what we need to communicate with the API. I hope that makes sense. Now let's create our server. So app.listen, and the port is going to be 5000. And once we are connected, we just have to return something. I'll just do console.log. I'll use backticks here, and I'll say server connected or server started on port 5000. Okay, so I'll just do control and then backtick one more time to open the terminal. And I'm actually going to use NodeMon to run the server. Okay, so let's install NodeMon as a dependency, as a dev dependency. Okay, so that should be quick, right? And once we have that installed as a dev dependency, as you can see here, we should have a script for that. So that will be dev, and I'll say NodeMon index.js. Right, so to start our server, we can just do npm run dev. Okay, and we should get server started on port 5000. Now I don't want the port to be hard coded, so I'm going to create a .env file here and have a port of 5000 in here. So right here I'm just going to do process.env.port. Now copy this and bring it here as well. I hope that makes sense. So now, since we changed something in the .env, I have to restart this. So npm run dev, and we should have the same text, server started on port 5000. But now this is actually coming from the .env. I hope that makes sense. All right, so let's quickly go ahead and actually connect to the database right away. So I'm going to create a cluster on MongoDB Atlas. Okay, now you can go ahead and start for free. Then I'm going to create an account with my email. Just accept and submit that. You have a welcome page. I just want to walk you through everything from scratch. Okay, that's why I'm doing all this. Wait a minute. JavaScript and Node, of course. Why so many questions though? And I'll say not sure. Okay, now let's finish this. And of course we are going to use free right here, and AWS is okay. Now for the server or the region, you can choose whatever you want. I'll just keep it at France, Paris. Okay, you won't even notice any difference, so there's no point. Now for database, I'll just close this. We'll do that later on. And right here, if you come to your cluster, you should see that things are being provisioned. Okay, So it will take a while, about 3 minutes for everything to be done. So as this is being provisioned, let's come back to the project and actually create the entire folder structure. We are going to have controllers folder. Oh, sorry, controllers folder. So there's no dot. We will need models folder as well. We will need, come on, that should be next. We will need routes folder. We will need uploads folder. We will need utilities or utils folder. And I think actually I'll need middleware folder as well. Right? And let's quickly work on the routes. Okay, so I'll create a route plural file inside of the routes folder. And in here, we are going to bring in router from Express. Okay, and we'll just instantiate the router and make sure we actually export it right away. Now, from the index, I just want to test the routes. So I'll go ahead and say app.use. And for anything slash API, we are going to bring in the route file. Okay, and so let's go ahead and bring in the routes file. Routes.js. Okay, so anything slash API should send us to the routes file. Now in the routes file, we can just have something very simple here just to test. So router.get and slash, I'll just have this simple return. So we need request and response, and here response.json should be equal to, I'll just say this actually works. Okay, so we save this, and what we are going to use to test our APIs is Postman. Okay, so Postman is what we are going to use to actually test our APIs. Okay, so make sure you go ahead and actually install Postman. You can see the cluster is almost done. There are things still working here. But go ahead and install Postman or download Postman and then install it locally. It's actually free, so you don't have to worry about anything. And if we save this and then try to, of course, the method should be get. The path is localhost, so HTTP localhost port 5000 / API. And then if we send this, we should actually get this actually works. Okay, so this is what we are getting from this endpoint. Okay, now I want to go ahead and actually connect to the database before we start working on the routes and the controllers and the models and all that. And so I want to make sure this is all done so that we can go ahead and actually work on the project. All right, so to connect to the database, let's come to database access. Okay, or to connect to the cluster, let's come to database access and actually create a new database user. Now the name is going to be Igator. You can call it admin, you can call it your name, whatever. And the password I'm actually going to auto generate, and we will need this, so I'm going to copy and then paste it here as a comment for now. Okay, we are going to need that password. So I have the name or the username, the password, and this is actually optional. I don't need that. And for the role, I'll just do read and write. That should be enough. And and I'll enable this for one specific cluster, and that's the cluster 0. That's the name of the cluster. That's why I wanted to change it to be more specific. And so I think that's it. Let's go ahead and add user, and our user Agator has been created. Okay, now let's go to network access as well, and I'm going to allow network from anywhere right here. Okay, and confirm this. Perfect. Now let's come back to cluster, and this is still being done. I don't know why it's taking so long. And to connect to the cluster, we are going to copy this link. So that's what we are going to use to actually connect to our MongoDB database. So we are going to paste this link that we just copied in the .env. I'll call this Mongo come on URL, and I'll just paste that. Now the password that we copied, that's the password of the user, should be in here. So that's this. So from here, you're going to paste that password, and as you can see, that's the name of the user, so that should match the password. Okay, now right after this slash, this forward slash, we are going to have the name of the database. Okay, now remember, we are only connecting to the cluster as a whole. Right here, that's cluster 0, but we need to give our database a name. Okay, or you can even come here and actually create the database, but I'm just going to give it a name here. I'll call it voting app tut. Okay, so voting app tutorial. So that's the name of the database that we are going to work with in the entire project. All right, so that's all I need in this .env for now, and I'm going to close it. And of course, once I'm done editing the .env, I should go ahead and actually restart the server. Okay, perfect. Now what I want to do is to actually first connect to the database before I even start this server. Okay, so with the connect method from Mongoose, I can just do connect and then pass in the MongoDB database URL. So process.env, and I called it Mongo URL. Okay, and once that is connected, then we are going to actually start our server. So I'll just cut that and then paste it here. I hope that makes sense. But in case we have any issues, I'm going to catch that and I'll just log that in the console. All right, so now, of course, everything is working, and that means our MongoDB database has actually been connected to our API that we have here, which is perfect. Now let's work on the routes right away. Okay, so we have the routes here, and of course this is just for a test. Let's have the actual routes that we need for the entire application. We are going to have routes for our voters, routes for elections, and then routes for candidates. Okay, so for router.post /voters/register, we want to register a new voter. Okay, so we will say register voter. Okay, which should be a controller coming from the controllers, folder here. So we are actually going to have voters or voter controller .js, and of course we should have register voter here. We need a request, a response, and next. And here we are just going to say response.json register voter. I hope that makes sense. Of course, down here we have to export that. I'm going to export that inside of an object, since we are going to export a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, now that's our first route. So if I come here and we go to /API/voters/register, and change the method to post, let's see what happens. We get an error. Register voter coming from controllers and then voter controller. I hope that makes sense. All right, so now if you try this, we get register voter, right, which is perfect. All right, now for the error that we had, if right now I just mess something up and come back, you're going to get an error, okay? And we don't want this crazy error here. We want to have our own custom error. So let's go ahead and actually create an error here in the middleware before we even start working on the actual controllers and the routes. Let's have error middleware.js, and we are going to have two error functions here, okay? The first one is going to be 404 or not found. So I'll leave a comment, unsupported or 404 endpoints should land us here, okay? So not found should be equal to request response next, and we will say error should be equal to new error. That's the error class. We are instantiating a new error, and we say not found dash request the original URL, right? And right below that, we are going to say response.status 404. Perfect. Now let's have our error middleware. Okay, so this is what we are going to use to actually structure our errors. Okay, give our error a unique look, right? We are going to actually have a model which is going to give it a more unique look. And we'll take our error that we are getting, request, response, and then the next. We are first going to check if the response header is already sent, okay? If it is sent, then we just return next and then pass in the error. Right, if it is not sent, then we are going to go ahead and say response.status, and the status should be the error code coming in, or we say 500, and we append the JSON and we say message should be the error message, or we say an unknown error occurred. Okay, we should of course go ahead and export this. So module.exports, we have not found, and then error handler. Perfect. So let's come back to the index, and of course we should bring those files in. Not found, and then error handler coming from middleware, error middleware. Okay, and down here we can just do app.use not found first, and then I'll duplicate that and have the error handler, sorry. All right, so that is it for our errors. Now if I send this same request, let's see what happens. Okay, I think we have a technical error, and so yeah, that was because of the right here. Yeah, that was here in the route. Okay, if the route doesn't exist, we should get a 404 not found, as you can see here. Now for the error handler, I actually want to have a model to actually give it a better structure. Okay, so this error handler middleware that we just created, I'm going to give it a model. I'm going to create a model. I'll call this error model.js class http error. That's what I'm going to call it. Should extend the error class, the main error class. Okay, we are going to use a constructor here, passing the message and then the code. We call super and then passing the message, and this dot code should be the error code that the user or that we passing in this case. Extend or extends, sorry. Right, now that's what we need. Right, so in case we are handling any error, this module is what we are going to use. Okay, so it takes in a message and an error code, and that's what we will pass in. I hope that makes sense. So that's it. I'll just close this error model, and I'll close this error middleware as well. And so let's get back into our routes. All right, so for the voters, we need 3 routes, one for the register, one for the login, and another to actually get a voter. Okay, so this will be login voter, and of course we have to create that controller, and this will be get voter. Now let's come to the voter controller, and to help you understand everything, I'm going to actually have some comments for each controller. Okay, I'll say register new voter. It's going to be a post request, and this will be the path, and this will be unprotected. Now I'll just duplicate this, and we'll have login voter. This will be login, and this will be a post request as well. So we have login voter. Of course, we should pass that in here. Third is going to be get voter or fetch voter. This will be a get request. This will have the ID of the voter, and this will actually be protected. Okay, so you have get voter, and we should pass this in as well. Of course, the response should be different. There should be get voter, and I will say login voter here. I hope that makes sense. All right, so if we should import these controllers, that's login and then get voter, we should import these controllers and then we test that in here. So for login, we should get login voter here, and if we pass in any ID, we should have get voter. Okay, so that is the route for the voters, and actually I'm going to have an environment variable here. So for environment, I'm going to create a new environment variable. I'll call this voting tooth. Save that. This will be tooth URL, and this will be HTTP. This is just an environment variable that's going to help us or save us from typing all the URL out every time. Okay, so this will be localhost port 5000/API. Okay, I'll just copy this and then paste it here in the current value as well. All right, now let's go ahead and save this and make this the current or the active environment. Okay, so voting tooth, that's the environment variable, or tooth URL, yeah, that's the environment variable that I'm going to be using. Okay, so for instance, if I come here and I try to go to register voter, I can just do tooth URL, as you can see here, and slash voter, or is it voters, and then slash register. I hope that makes sense. So if I send this, I'm going to get register user. Okay, I hope that makes sense, guys. All right, so basically the first part of the URL is in the environment variable. We just have to add slash and then the other part, which is in these routes. Okay, perfect. So that is for the voters routes. Of course, we should go ahead and actually create the routes for the other, other things that we are going to have. We are going to have election routes, router or posts, elections should actually add an election. So you have add election. I'll just duplicate this a bunch of times. We will have get, and this will get all elections, or get elections. We have another get, and this will have slash ID, and that will get a particular election. So get election singular. You have a delete, and this will delete a particular election. So we will need an ID of that election. I'll call this remove election. We will need a patch, and that will update an election. We need the ID of that election, and we will say update election. And we will need another get to get candidates that belongs to a particular election. So the ID of the election, and then we get the candidates. I'll say get candidates of election. And lastly, we will need another get to get the voters of a particular election. Get election voters. Perfect. Of course, we should go ahead and actually create the elections controller, or election controller. And just as I did for the voter controller, I'll just copy this, come here and paste it. This will be add new election. So that will be API elections / nothing. And it will be a post request, of course, but it will be protected and can only be done by an admin. Okay, this will say add election. I'll just go ahead and duplicate this a few more times. You have get elections, get all elections. So there will be get requests, and it will be unprotected. Oh, it should actually be protected, but not only by admin. And we will get elections, or I'll say get all elections, right? Get single election, it will be protected, of course. And so to have an ID, it will be a get request. It will say get election singular, get single election. That will be the response for now. we will need get election candidates. That will be slash the ID of the election and then candidates. That will be a get request. It will be protected. And let's say get election or get candidates of election. That was the name I gave it here. Okay. And I'll just say get candidates of election. Right. And what else? Get voters of an election or get election voters. You will need the ID and then voters. It will be a get request, of course, protected. And that will be get election voters. Or get voters in an election. What else do we need? Remove and update. Okay, so that will be patch and delete. So that's just two remaining. I'll just delete this one. For patch and delete, only admin, of course. You need an ID. This will be delete for the method. And remove election, that's the name. Delete election, right? You will need update selection. You will need an ID for that. To be a patch request only by an admin, and we will say update. Is that it? Yeah, update selection, right? Oh, a colon before the ID, of course. Update selection. And I think these are all the controllers that we need for this file. Okay, so module export get elections, get election. We need update selection, remove election, get candidates of election, and get voters, get election voters. Yeah, I think that's all. All right, now let's bring all these controllers const, and I'll bring all these from controllers and then election controller. Okay, perfect. Now add election. I didn't add that, which is the first one. So add election. Right, so now if I come back, actually for the voters, you know what, I'm going to make this as presentable as possible. So let's come back to collections right here, and I'll close this. Let's come back to collections and create a new collection. I'm going to call this, I'll rename this and call it voting tooth or voting app tooth. That's the collection name. And so I'll go ahead and let's first have the register, login, and then get voter. Okay, so for the register a voter, of course we are going to use the tooth URL environment variable that we had, and we have to go to voters/register. That's the endpoint. Okay, if you can remember, voters and then register will get us to the register voter controller, right? So once we have that and we get a response of register voter, we can actually go ahead and save this so that we don't have to always type the URL in. Okay, so we can give this a name of register voter and then choose the collection. That's the collection I just created, and I'm going to save this. Okay, now for login voter, that will be the root URL /voters /login. Okay, if I send this request, I'll get login voter, which means the endpoint is working. We are getting the actual controller, and so I'll say login voter and then save this, and we have one more for the voter route, right? That will be get voter. So let's bring in the root URL and the ID of the voter we want to get. For now, just a random ID. And so if we send this request, let's see what we get. And we have an issue, meaning something is wrong. Oh, it should be a get request. Okay, so that was my bad. That was an error. And so now we have get voter. So all the voter endpoints are working. Okay, meaning the controllers are working together with the endpoints, right? I just want to make sure all these things are in place and they are working before we start actually working thoroughly on the individual controllers. And I'll save this. So let's go ahead and do same for the elections, right? So that will be root URL elections. This should give us all the elections, get all elections. So I'll say get elections. We have get election, which should just have an ID. Of course, I will have to create a new. So root URL elections and then an ID should get us a single election, right? I'm going to go ahead and then save this, get election singular. We have add election, of course. That will be a post for the method. So root URL elections, and if it's a post, then we should get add election, right? So let's go ahead and save this and hit save. We need update and delete as well. Update selection, that will be a patch request. So root URL elections and the ID of the election we want to patch or update, and we get the response election, right? We need delete election, elections and an ID, and then the method delete, we get delete election. And I know this is boring, but I just want to have it in place, just so, I mean, it's going to make our lives so easy. Okay, so whenever you want to register a user, you just click this and then you can just, come to body, fill in the form and then register a user. It's that simple. You don't have to come back, be filling, the URL and all that. Okay, so that is why I want to have these in place, and our life is going to be easier creating this API. Now the next is going to be to get candidates that belongs to a particular election. So elections, the ID of the election, and then candidates should take us to get candidates of an election. Perfect. Let's save this as well. Get candidates of election, and I think last one will be the get voters. Okay, so that will be a get request as well. Elections, the ID of the election, and then voters. And if I hit send, get election voters. Get voters of election. All right, so these are the endpoints so far that we need, and we are going to now have the endpoints for our candidates as well. We should work on the candidate controller.js, and just like we had for the election, I'll just paste this here. You have add candidate, which will be post. So API candidates, right? It can only be done by an admin. Add candidate, add candidate. Perfect. Now I'll duplicate this 3 more times. This will be a full CRUD. So you have get candidate as well. And so you say get candidate, this will be a get request, API candidates, and the ID of that candidate. All right. You need update candidate. Actually, remove candidate first. So we'll need an ID, of course, to remove a candidate. This will be a delete request. That's the method, and it can only be done by an admin, of course. We say delete candidate. And lastly, the update candidate will be vote candidate. Okay, it will be a patch request, and we need the ID of that candidate we are trying to vote for, and that won't be only admin, and we will say vote candidate. Right, so now of course we should make sure these are exported. So module exports, add candidates, get candidate, remove candidates, and then vote candidates. Okay, I'll just copy this, and in our routes we should bring them in const, and then paste. Should be coming from controllers and then candidates controller. Okay, so router.post, that will be the add candidates, and add candidate, that will be the post. You will need a get, that will get candidate. You will need a delete, that will delete candidate, or remove candidates. That's the name of the controller. Now of course we need an ID for each except for the add, and this will be for patch. That's the method. That will be vote candidate. Okay, that's the controller that will take care of that. All right, so that is all for the routes. Okay, for the entire application, these are the routes that we are going to use, right? And so let's go ahead and actually have, these endpoints down for the candidates as well. First we have post, and that will be tooth candidates, and that should add a candidate. Okay, so add candidate. We have get candidate, so tooth candidate /id get candidates, of course. I'm going to save that. We have vote candidates, which is a patch request. So patch candidates, and then the ID of that candidate. We send this request, we get vote candidate. And lastly, remove candidates, okay, which is a delete request. So candidates /ID. That should give us remove candidates. All right, and this is the last endpoint, delete candidate. So these are the endpoints we have for the entire application, okay, and this is going to help us a lot. That's why I had to make sure we have it in place first before we actually start working on the controllers. So of course we have to make sure they are all working, okay, before we start working on the individual controllers. Perfect. So now I think we should have the models for all the all the controllers that we have. Let's have our models. We will have voter model .js and candidates model .js, and lastly election model .js. Okay, so these are the three models that we need. We are first going to start with the voter model. Of course, I'm going to bring in schema model and then types from Mongoose. Okay, so let's create our schema. I'll say voter schema. That's what I'll call it. Should be equal to new schema from Mongoose, right? And we need a full name for every voter. That'll be a type of string, and it will be required, right? And I'll duplicate this a few times. So we need full name, email. It will be the same type string, and then required password, same thing. And I'll need voted elections. Okay, this will actually be an array. So let me remove this and have an array here with the type of types dot object ID, and I'll reference the election model, which we don't have yet, okay, but we can reference that since we are going to create that in a minute. And I'll say required should be true here as well. So this will actually be related to the elections model once we create it, okay. That's why I'm referencing that to the election model that I'm going to create. All right, so basically every voter is going to have this array, and inside the array will be the elections that person has voted in. I hope that makes sense. And this is the relationship we are creating so far between the voter and the elections model. And lastly, we are going to have is admin, and the type is going to be Boolean, and it's going to have a default of false, okay. And I think we should actually have timestamps as well, set to true. And that's what we need here. So module exports, I'll create my model and call it voter, and voter schema will be the schema I want to use to create this model. I hope that makes sense. All right, so let's create the election model as well. Of course, we are going to bring in the schema module model and the types from Mongoose. And so let's create a schema real quick. We'll call this selection schema, new schema, takes in an object. For each election, we need a title. The type will be string. It will be required. so required true. I'll duplicate this 2 times, and we need a description of the election. It will be required, and the type will be string as well. And then we need a thumbnail. Now once we upload every image, we will push it to Cloudinary, and then Cloudinary will return a string. So the thumbnail here is going to be a string as well. We need 2 more things: candidates. So the candidates that belong to this particular election, and that will be a type of types object ID, and of course it will be required, so required true, and the reference will be the candidate model that we don't have yet. Okay, so each election will have candidates, an array of candidates, right? And each candidate will belong to an election. I hope that makes sense. And each election will have voters as well, which will be an array. The type will be types. Come on, we have an object type, types.object ID to be required, and the reference will be the voter model that we have already created. Okay, so each election will have voters, as you can see here. That is why we have this. That's the relationship between the election and the voter. And each voter would have voted elections as well. Okay, the voted elections, the elections the voter has actually participated in, and this will be the voters that have voted in this particular election. I hope that makes sense. All right, now let's go ahead and have a model that we are going to export. So model, come on, model, we'll call this selection. We should make sure it is selection, or we call it election to merge this, and we'll say election schema. That's the schema we are using to create this model. And that's all for this election model. Now I'm going to copy this and then come to the candidate model here as well, paste it. Let's go ahead and create the candidate model real quick. Candidate schema, new schema, takes in an object. We need a full name for every candidate, so the type will be string, and it will be required. We need an image, which is also going to come from Cloudinary, so the type will be string. Come on, string. Wait, did I make that mistake for all the models? No, I did not. I'll check here as well. Perfect. All right, so the type will be string. It will be required as well, and I'll have a motto, so I'll just duplicate this to be required, and a string as well. And we'll have vote count. The vote count will be number, and the default will be 0. Now I'll have election. Okay, and that will be the election ID that this candidate belongs to. So this will have a type of types.object ID. Of course, it will be required, and it will reference the election model. Okay, and that's it. That's all we need. Now if you want, you can add, timestamps, but I don't think we need that. Okay, I don't think we need that. All right, so let's go ahead and export our model. I'll call this candidate, and then the candidate schema will be the schema to create this model. And that's all for all our models. That is all for the models for this entire project. Okay, so we can go ahead and start working on the controllers, starting with the voter controller. We should be able to create voters, login or register voters, login voters, and then get voters. Okay, so that's what we should get on to. Now, all these controllers are going to be asynchronous since they are going to communicate with the database. Okay, so I'm going to use a sync await for all of the controllers. All right, so in front of the functions, we should have a sync. We are going to await some things in the controller. All right, so starting with the register voter. First of all, I'm going to bring in our model. That's the voter model, which should be required from models and voter model. Okay, I'm going to bring in our HTTP error model as well, just so we can handle our errors. If you've forgotten, that's the error model we have here. So we just pass in an error message and an error code. Okay, I hope that makes sense. All right, so these are the two things I need right now. And so let's go ahead. I'm going to put this inside a try catch in case we have any issues adding or registering a user. We are going to return next and say new HTTP error. And we are going to pass in our error message. I'll say voter registration failed. Okay, and I'll say 422 for the error code. All right, but to create a user, of course, we need a full name coming from the client. We need an email. We need a password, and we need confirm password, which I'm going to call password 2. And that should be coming from the request body. Okay, now let's go ahead and check if all these things are present. So if not full name, or if not email, or if not password, or if not confirm password or password 2, then I'm going to go ahead and return an error message. So return next new HTTP error, or pass in fail in or fails error, and 422 as the error code. But if we have everything, then we can go ahead and actually I'm going to make all emails lowercase. Okay, so I'll say new email should be equal to email.to lowercase. Now once we have a lowercase email, we are going to check if the email actually exists or already exists in the database. Okay, so of course we don't want duplicate emails, so we don't want to register another person if that email the person entered is already in the database. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and check if that email exists. I'll say email email exists should be equal to await voter model dot find one, and I'm going to find email of the new email. Okay, so if we get an email back, so if email exists, then we are going to return an error. So return next new HTTP error, and the error message will say email already exists, and 442 will be the error code. Sorry, 422. All right, but if the email does not exist, then we are going to go ahead and make sure the password is actually 6+ characters. Okay, we are just making sure the password is long enough. So if password.trim, and once we trim it, we are going to check for the length as well. If it is less than 6 characters, then we are going to say return next new HTTP error, and we will say password should be at least 6 characters. 422. If the password is long enough, then we are going to go ahead and make sure the password and the confirmed password are actually the same. Okay, so I'll say make sure passwords match. So if password, or I'm going to check if password is not equal to password 2, which is the confirmed password, then I'm going to return an error here. I'll say passwords do not match. But once they match, then we can go ahead and actually hash the password. Okay, so to hash a password, we are going to use bcrypt. Right. To hash a password, we are going to use bcrypt. So I'm going to go ahead and open a new terminal here, and I'm going to install bcrypt.js. Okay, and that was fast. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in bcrypt.js. I'll just call it bcrypt, but we are bringing it from bcrypt.js. Okay, let's bring in that, and we are going to use that to actually hash our password here. So I will say hash password. Let's have a salt first, which should be equal to await bcrypt.gensalt. We are generating a salt, and I'll put in 10. Basically, the 10 is how hard the salt is going to be. Okay, and I'll say hashed password should be equal to await bcrypt.hash. I'll pass in the password that we want to hash and the salt. Okay, and once we have a hashed password, I want to make sure, or I want to check if the email is achiever@gmail.com. Now, if it is achiever@gmail.com, then I want to make this user an admin. I hope that makes sense. But if it is any other email, then I just want to set its admin to be false, and therefore making that user not an admin. Okay, now of course you can go ahead and edit this and put in your own email, and once you create an account, your email is going to be the admin. Therefore, you will have a lot more privileges whereby you can actually edit elections, add candidates, and all that. Okay, I hope that makes sense, and we are going to understand that further as we code along. So here I'm going to check if user, or I'll actually say no user or voter should be admin except for one with email achiever@gmail.com. I hope that makes sense. So that is what I'm going to check. I will first let its admin to be false, and if new email is equal to achiever@gmail.com, then its admin is going to be true. So in this case, if you want to change it to, let's say, admin, you can do admin@gmail.com. And once you register a user with this email, this user is going to be the admin for the entire project. I hope that makes sense. But in my case, I want this to be achiever@gmail.com. So once we are done with all these checks, now we can go ahead and actually add the user or the voter to the database. Okay, so I'll say save new voter to DB or database. I'll say const new voter should be equal to await voter model. Come on, await voter model dot create. Okay, and to create a voter, we need full name, email, right? Coming from the voter model, we need name, email, password, and it's admin. Okay, now this will be populated later on, but for now these are the ones that we need. Okay, Remember, I actually even set this to be false by default, but I'll actually set it here as well. So we need an email. So the email here is going to be the new email, and the password is going to be the hashed password, and its admin is going to be its admin that we have here. In this case, it's going to be true. Okay, that is if we registered a user whose email is achiever@gmail.com. I hope that makes sense. All right, so once we create the user in the database, or once we add the user to the database, we can send a response, and the status can be 201, meaning a new resource has been created, and the JSON message will say new voter, and then we can pass in the email of the voter or the full name of the voter. So let's say new voter achiever created. Okay, so with this we should actually be able to register. Wait a minute, this should be gen salt. Okay, so with this we should be able to register a user. I just hope I don't have any. I'll just wrap this in parentheses. All right, so we check for the length of the password. If it is less than 6 characters, then we send this error message, right? Or we return this error message to the next middleware. And here we're actually checking if the email exists. Okay, so you should make sure you remove this exclamation mark. So we are checking the database to see if the email actually exists. If it does exist, then we are going to return an error, right, saying email exists. I hope that makes sense. All right, so with all this in place, we should actually be able to register a user. I'm going to have some space down here. So let's get back to Postman and go to register user, and make sure you come to body and then URL encoded. That's the kind of form you are going to send. And looking at things, we need a full name right here, email, password, and then password 2, which is the confirmed password. So we need full name. I'll do John Doe, and we need an email. I'll do john@gmail.com. By the way, let me show you the database. If you go to clusters and browse collection right here, you should see we have voting aptitude. That's the database name. Okay, if you can remember in our .env right here, we have voting app name. Okay, that's the name we gave to the database right after the /. I hope that makes sense. All right, so that database has been automatically created, and as you can see, we have voters collection in here. Okay, and if you check the voter model, that's the name we gave to the model. Okay, we named it voter, and it just pluralized it, okay, to make a voters collection right here. All right, so I'm just showing you to make sure you know that there are no documents so far in the voters collection. As you can see, there's nothing or nobody registered in the voters collection. Okay, so let's go ahead and try registering. Of course, if you try and then send this request, we are going to get fill in all fields. Okay, we need password and password 2. So password, I'll do John123, and password 2, that'll be the confirmed password. And if I try and then send this, I should get fill in all fields still. But if I have something in here which does not match the password, so the confirmed password and the password does not match, and we get passwords do not match. Okay, now I'll do John123, and now you can see that everything is valid. Okay, we have the passwords matching, we have an email and the full name. Okay, so now if I send this request, we have new voter John Doe created. Okay, so if I come back to the collection, that's the voters collection that we have. If I come back and then enter the voter collection, we should actually have John Doe, okay, in the database. I hope that makes sense. So that's working. Now, if I should send the same request with the same email. If I try to register anyone with the same email, let's see what we get. Okay, we get email already exists. Okay, and of course that user shouldn't be registered. So if I refresh this collection, we should have the old user with that email. I hope that makes sense. So that is it for the voter registration or the user registration. And now I think we should get on to the login. Okay, we should be able to log in users or voters. So to log in a user or a voter, we need to bring in, of course, I'm going to put this in a try catch. And in case of anything, I'll return next new HTTP error. And I'll say login failed. Please check your credentials or try again later. I'll say 422. Right. Perfect. And in a try, of course, we need something from the request coming in. Okay, so we need email of the user and then the password coming from the request body. And once we have that, we want to make sure they have something in there. Okay, so they have some characters in it. Okay, so if there is no email or there is no password, then we are going to say return next new HTTP error and fill in. I'm going to actually change the email to be all lowercase, just like we did for the registration. And once I do that, I'm going to check if this email actually exists or there is any user that exists in the database with this email, right? So I'll say voter should be equal to await, and then the voter model, I'll say find one and pass in the email. That will be the new email. Perfect. All right, so in case there is no user returned, in case we don't get any user back, then this email actually does not exist. Okay, so we can log in a user who is not registered, right? So I'll say HTTP error and say invalid credentials. But if we get any user back, then we are going to go ahead and compare that user's password, that's the hashed password. As you can see from the database, we actually hashed the password. Okay, so we are going to get the raw password from the request body and then compare it with the hashed password from the voter. Okay, and the voter we are getting back from the database, right? So I'll say compare passwords, and I'll say compare pass should be equal to await bcrypt dot compare. There's that method. I'll pass in the request password and I'll compare it to the voter's password, that's the hashed password. All right, now if it doesn't match, so if compare password is false, then I'm going to return next and say new HTTP error, and here too I'll say invalid credentials. I hope that makes sense. Right, perfect. But if it does match, okay, so if the request password matches the password coming back from the database, then we should send back a token. Okay, we should send back a token. Right, so I'm actually going to have a function here to generate tokens. And we are actually going to install a package called jsonwebtoken. That's what we are going to use to create the token. So I'll do npm install jsonwebtoken. Okay, that was quick. And let's create our token real quick. Wait a minute. I'll say generate token should be equal to, of course, I'll take in a payload, and I'll say token should be equal to JWT. Of course, we should bring in JWT. So I'll do JWT require JSON web token, right? Yeah. So JWT does sign. It takes in a payload and a secret. Okay. Now the secrets, I'm actually going to put it in here and call it JWT underscore secret. Secret. And I'll just have something random in here. Okay. With numbers and all that. Right, so that's my secret, and since we just altered this, I have to restart the server. Npm run dev. Whenever you change something in the, or you alter the .env file, you have to restart the server, right? So I'll bring in the secret, that's the, so JWT secret, and we need some options here. Okay, so expires in, I'll do 1 day. We can do, it should be a string. You can do 1 hour. You can do, 1 minute, whatever you want. All right, and here I'll just return the token. That's it. Okay, that's all for the generate token. Okay, so in here, once the password is correct, that means once the password from the request matches the password from the database, I'm going to go ahead and let me actually destructure some things. I'll get the ID of the user or the voter. I'll get the admin from the voter as well, and the voted elections as well. I'll get that, and that should be coming from the voter that we got from the database. So once we have these, we can go ahead and actually have a token, and that will be equal to generate token. That's the function we just created. And remember, it takes in a payload right here, and the payload is an object here, and we have ID and its admin. Okay, so those are the two things I'll pass in the payload, and I'll send a response back with the token that we just created, the voted elections, the ID, and its admin. That's what I'm sending back. Okay, so if I save this, hopefully you don't have any errors here. If I save this and we come to Postman, let's try and then log in a user real quick. So far we have only one user, that's John Doe. And so body and a URL encoded. We need an email. For now, I'll just have something that does not exist. And we need a password. And I'll do a random password. Let's see what happens, okay? If I try to send this request, I get invalid credentials, right? But let's try and then enter something. Of course, if I send an empty field, fill in all fields, right? I'll do John Doe, or sorry, john@gmail.com. That was the email. If I send this, I should get invalid credentials because the password is not correct. But if I do John123, that was the password used to create John Doe's account. And now if I send this request, I should get a token. Wait a minute. Login field, please try. Okay, I think I have an error. In here. I have an error. Wait a minute. Let's debug this together real quick. I'll remove the catch. I'll remove the try as well. Is it voted elections? Yeah, voted elections, right? Voted elections. So I'll bring my try catch, and they should actually be voted elections. Okay. right? And if you check the database, that's actually how it should be. Voted elections right here. So it's plural. I made it singular, and probably that's why we had this error. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually try this one more time. Let's try logging in John Doe, and this persists. What is going on? It's admin voted elections. Generate token. Okay, this should be .env. All right, sorry guys. Sorry about that. So you probably saw that, but I didn't. So once again, let's try and then log in John Doe and see what happens. Boom. So we get the token, of course, which ends here. We get the ID, the voted elections, and then it's admin, okay, which is false by default. Now, of course, if I register a user with the email of Achiever, remember we had this here that if the email is achiever@gmail.com, then this user should be the admin, okay, or its admin should be true. I hope that makes sense. Now, as I said, of course, you can make this your email or whatever you want, right? But in this case, if we create a user with the email of achiever@gmail.com, then that person is going to be the admin. Okay, so let's create a next achiever. That's the name. And for the email, achiever@gmail.com. For the password, I'll do achiever123. Achiever123. Okay. And if I create this user, okay, new voter and it's achiever created. Now, if I check here and refresh real quick the voters collection, we have 2 users or 2 voters so far. And as you can see, Achiever is actually the admin. Okay. John Doe was false, but here it is true. Right. Now, if I go ahead and create one more user, Jane Doe, and the password, I'll do Jane123 for the confirm, and here to Jane123. And for the email, it will be jane@gmail.com. Let's register this user quickly. We have Jane Doe created. And if I refresh, this user should be false. Okay, that's the admin. It's admin. Should be false for Jane Doe as well. So every single user is going to be false except for a next achiever. I hope that makes sense. All right. Of course, we can go ahead and log in as any of these users. I'm going to log in as achiever. And if the password is not correct, in this case, this is John Doe's password, we shouldn't be able to log in. Okay, so we get invalid credentials. But once the password is correct, then we should get a token, it's admin and all that. Okay, so everything is working exactly as expected, guys. And so we should go ahead and finish with the voters controller. And the last thing we need to do is actually to get a voter. Okay, so let's quickly do that. And to get a voter, we need something from the request params. Okay, this time it's not going to be the request body, but we are getting the ID or the ID of the person that we want to fetch from the database. All right, now I'll put this in a try catch here, or if you want, you can even bring this in the try catch. And of course, in case of anything, we are going to return next HTTP error here, and we say couldn't get voter. Right, that's enough. I'll say 422 as well, or you can even do 44, right? So I'll say voter should be equal to await with the voter model, of course, which we are going to find by ID, and you pass in the ID that we want to find, ID of the voter. Okay, now I'm going to do select, and I'll do negative password. I just don't want to show the password of the user. Okay, I don't want to return that to the client. So we return the voter and that's it. Okay, so that is all for the voter controller. That is all for the voter controller. Of course, if we try and then do this, I'll copy the ID of NS Achiever here, and let's go to get voter, and here we are going to pass in the ID. And now if I try to get NS Achiever, we have him. Okay, we have Achiever. All right, so that's it. That's all we need to do for the voter controller. I hope that makes sense. Perfect. So the next controller that we should work on should be the elections controller. So let's enter the elections controller right here and be able to actually add an election. Now, to work on the add election, we are going to be uploading files, right? And we are going to renaming the files as well. And also we are going to actually push the files to the cloud using Cloudinary. Okay. And so let's go ahead and install these packages before we start working in the controller. I'll do npm install express file upload. So instead of Motor, which is the most common package for uploading files to Express, we're actually going to use Express file upload, right? We're going to install Cloudinary as well. And lastly, I'm going to install UUID, okay? All right, so let's hit enter to install these packages. I'm actually going to go ahead and create an account on Cloudinary. So Cloudinary, not the documentation, come on. So go ahead and actually sign up for free, of course. And I'll sign up with Google. All right, so once we are logging in, let me actually come back to our index.js file. And in here, I'm going to bring in express file upload. So let's require express file upload. And I'll just say right here, app.use upload. Come on. Upload, yeah. Okay, that's all I need to do in the index.js. So make sure you have this right here, and you can actually be able to upload files in this application. Why is this taking so long though? With Cloudinary, we need API key, the cloud name, and the secret. Okay, so those are the three things I want to have, and that's actually going to be in the utils folder. So I'll just create a Cloudinary file here, cloudinary.js. Of course, I'm going to go ahead and actually bring in v2. I'll call that Cloudinary, and that should be coming from the Cloudinary package that we installed. Okay, so you will say cloudinary.config, takes in an object. We need a cloud name, so cloud underscore name, process.env dot cloudinary, come on, cloud name. We don't have that yet, but I'm going to create that in a second. Process.env cloudinary API key, and lastly we need a secret. Process.env cloudinary API secret. All right, once we have these, module.export cloudinary. Okay, so of course we should create these. I'll come to the .env file, and wait a minute, we need a Cloudinary cloud name. We will have that shortly. We need a Cloudinary API key, and lastly we need a Cloudinary secret. or Cloudinary API secrets. Okay, which we are going to get all these from the Cloudinary account that we just created. And so it's just something particular preventing you from successful. Nah, bro. This is actually the cloud name. Okay, so I can copy that right here and paste that in here. So that's the cloud name. We need the API key and the API secret. And I think I can find that here. Let's go to the settings. Okay, so let's go to API keys. We have the API key here. So let's just copy that, come back and then paste it right here. And lastly, we need a secret. Okay, so if you click this icon, you should go ahead and actually, and that's what I'm just going to paste here and then approve. And I can copy this API secrets into my .env. Okay, once I have all these, of course, I should go ahead and actually restart the server. Okay, whenever you change something in the .env, you should start the server. All right, so everything should be working as we code along. Make sure you have all these in the .env and make sure you have the configuration for the Cloudinary, and also make sure you have that's in the index.js. Make sure you have express file upload brought in and you instantiate it right here. And once we have all these, we can go ahead and work on the election controller. Okay, now let's check out the model. That's the election model. We have title, description, and then thumbnail. Okay, so those are the three things we need from the request body. Now, to show you something real quick, I'll send a response right away. Response the JSON, I'll send back the request body. Okay, and so let's quickly go to Postman, and I just want to show you something. That's all. How do I have, okay, I have add elections here, or add elections, sorry. So let's come to body, and this time we are going to select form data. Okay, instead of the URL encoded, I want form data. Okay, now to add an election, I need a title, a description, and a thumbnail. Okay, now the thumbnail, instead of text, is actually going to be a file, right? And so we can go ahead and select a file, and we can choose any of these files, right? I'm going to choose this person, and the title, I'll just have something random, and something random for the description as well. Right, now let's send this, and I'm going to show you something real quick. We do not have the thumbnail. Okay, now to get a thumbnail, that will be the request files dot thumbnail, and I'm going to send this request again, and now this is what we get. Now the name of the file that we selected was candidate 4.jpg. Okay, so we are going to actually make use of this. That's why I want to show you what we are getting from the thumbnail. Okay, we are calling it thumbnail because that's the name we want it to be called, but of course you can go ahead and actually give it any name you want. Okay, and that should be the name coming from the client. I hope that makes sense. So in the React application that we created, we actually called it thumbnail. Okay, so we are going to also make use of the size of the image or the file that we are bringing in. And so far, I think those are the two things that we are going to take note of or pay attention to. Okay, so the name of the file or the thumbnail that we are bringing in or we are uploading. And then the second thing is the size of the file. So pay attention to these things. Now, later on in the video, I'm going to make sure only an admin can be able to add an election. Okay, so I'm actually going to have a check here. Only admin can add election. And we are not going to make use of this right now, but I just want to have it here. Okay, just so we don't forget. So the request user is admin, I'm going to check something like this. If the user is not an admin, or if it's admin for that user or that voter is actually false, then this person shouldn't be able to continue. So you are just going to return new HTTP error, and we say only admins or only an admin can perform this action. I hope that makes sense. 403. Okay, now as I said, we are not going to make use of this right now, so I'll just comment it out, but we are going to come back to it. Okay, so let's go ahead, and from the request body we need a title and a description. That's from the request body, and if we don't have that, then of course we have to return an error. Okay, so if not title or not description, if you don't have any of these two, then we are going to return next new HTTP error, and we say please fill in all fields, or just fill in all fields. Okay, 422. Right, now we want to check if we have a thumbnail as well. So if we do not have a thumbnail, so if request.files doesn't have a thumbnail, then we are going to return it as well. Return next new HTTP error, and we will say choose a thumbnail. 422 as well. Okay, right, now if you do have a thumbnail, then we are going to continue and get that thumbnail from the request files. Okay, and we are going to make sure the image size is less than 1 megabyte. Okay, so I will say if thumbnail dot size, if it's greater than 1,000,000 bits or 1,000,000 bytes. Okay, if it's greater than 1,000,000 bytes, then we have a problem. The file is too big, so we are going to return here as well HTTP, come on, HTTP error, and I'll say file size too big, should be less than 1 megabyte. Okay, right, but if it is less than 1 megabyte, then we can go on and actually rename the image. And the reason why I have to rename the email or the thumbnail is because different people can have the same name for a file. So someone can name his thumbnail as my thumbnail.png, for instance, and another person will have the same name for his or her thumbnail, and I don't want that confusion in the database. Therefore, we are going to go ahead and actually rename the thumbnail. Okay, so to rename the thumbnail, I'll let file name be equal to the thumbnail dot name. If we check back, we actually have that. Okay, so we have name in a thumbnail. So in this case, it is candidate4.jpg. Okay, so we get that, and I'll say file name should be equal to file name dot split, and I'll split by the dot, and I'm splitting by the dot just so I can get the extension. Okay, so I'm splitting by the dot, and the first part is going to be the actual name of the file, and the last part is going to be the extension of the file. I hope that makes sense. All right, now once we split that, I'll say file name should be equal to file name, and the first part, we get the first part, the actual name of the file, and we are going to bring in UUID here. So I'll use v4, I'll call this UUID, and that should be coming from UUID. Okay, this will just generate some random text which is always unique, and I'll add a dot, and lastly I'll add the extension. So file name, and then in here I'll say file name dot length -1, which should always give me the last part of the array that we splitted here. Okay, so in this case, it will always give me the extension. So basically, I have the file name itself. I have some unique random characters. I have a dot and then the extension of the file. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So once we have this, then we can actually go ahead and actually upload this file into our uploads folder that we have here in our project. All right, so I'll say upload file to uploads folder. So let's await thumbnail.mv. Okay, now I need a path dot join. I'll say their name. Let's go back up one more folder and into the uploads folder, and I'll get the file name that we just had. Okay, and wait a minute. Okay, of course, this should be an asynchronous controller. All these should be asynchronous. I'll just copy and then paste it. For all the controllers that we have. Okay, so we go on and we save this file. Now, if everything goes well, sorry, if we have an error, I'll check for an error here. If we have any kind of error, then we are going to check. Now, if we have any kind of error, then we are going to return HTTP error and put in that error that happened. Okay, but if everything goes well, that means if we are able to actually save this image or this thumbnail, then we are going to go ahead and actually store image on Cloudinary. Okay, we are going to upload the image to Cloudinary. Okay, so to do that, of course, we need to bring in Cloudinary from the utils. That's from the configuration file that we have here, right? And so I'll say Cloudinary require. We have to go up into the utils folder and get Cloudinary.js. So we're actually going to expect a result from Cloudinary. So let's await Cloudinary.uploader.upload. We need a path. Basically, once the thumbnail is uploaded here, we are going to target that image that just got uploaded and we are going to send that to Cloudinary. I hope that makes sense. So here we say path.join and we need a their name. We are going up into the uploads folder and the file name, and I'm going to have an option here. Let's say resource type should be image. Okay, now once this is successful, or let's actually check if we weren't successful uploading the, so if results secure URL is false, then that means the image upload wasn't successful. Okay, or sending the image to Cloudinary wasn't successful. Therefore, you return an error, say new HTTP error, and we say couldn't upload image to Cloudinary, and that'll be 422. Okay, now if we are successful right here, if we were able to upload the image to Cloudinary, then we are going to save election to DB. So new election should be equal to await, of course, and let's bring in the election model. Election model should be equal to require. We have to go to the models, election model. Okay, so election model dot create. We need a title, we need a description, and we need a thumbnail, which in this case is going to be the result.secure URL. So once we have that, let's just return new election. Perfect. All right, so of course I should have all these in a try catch. Why am I just typing? I'm going to have all these in a try catch, so I'll just copy from here and have everything in a try catch. If we have any error, we are just going to return next new HTTP error and say, I'll just, you know what, I'll just pass in error. And let me just pass in the error. And for the try, I'll just paste what we had earlier. Okay, just shift this over. Perfect. All right, so now let's save this and actually test this out in Postman. So of course, if we check the Cloudinary, we shouldn't have, if we go to assets, so these are just images that have been uploaded here by Cloudinary. Okay, we so far haven't uploaded any image, but let's go ahead and actually test this out. And once we are successful with creating an election, we should have our image pushed to Cloudinary. And of course, here in the uploads folder as well, we should have the image or the thumbnail there. Okay, so right here, I'm actually going to enter some reasonable text. I will say Harvard presidential elections 2024, and that's the title. For description, I'll just keep it like this. And for the election thumbnail, I'm going to choose Harvard. Okay, the Harvard flag. All right, so let's go ahead and send this request. And path it's not defined. Of course, we should bring in path. Okay, so let's bring in path. Let's require path. Right, and now let's send this request. And boom, we have title, Harvard presidential elections. We have the description, we have thumbnail, which is coming from Cloudinary. So now if we refresh this, that's the assets folder that we have here on Cloudinary. And I don't know why Cloudinary is so slow today, but let's just be patient. And as you can see, we have our Harvard flag here. Okay, and if we check our uploads folder, we should have that here as well. Okay, so everything is working for the add election controller. Everything is working exactly as expected. Okay, so now let's move on to actually get our elections. And so far we have only one election, so let me actually go ahead and create one more election. And I'll say Legon presidential elections 2024. And for the flag, I'll just grab a flag from here. That's Legon. And for the description, you know what, I'm actually going to use lorem ipsum to get some dummy text. And yeah, this should be enough. Come up here and then paste it. Perfect. And we have our thumbnail already, so I can just send this. And we have a title, Legon presidential elections 2024, a thumbnail, which should be uploaded to Cloudinary, of course. If I refresh this, or I should just use this refresh. Okay, so we should have that. And of course, it should be uploaded in here as well. Okay, now I'll have one more election. UENR, that's UNE, presidential elections. And for the flag, I don't think I have a flag for UNE, so I'll just choose anything. for the flag. I'll choose the Stanford flag and I'll send this. I'll just keep, you know what, let me just edit this a little bit for the, that's for the description, and I'll send this. Okay, so UNEP Presidential Elections 2024 has been added, and if you come here and refresh, we have the Stanford flag that I chose for UNEP. Okay, so everything is working, and now so far we have, that's if we check our database, we should have the elections collection here as well, of course. In other words, I have to refresh this whole page. And of course, we have the elections collection. Okay, and so far we should have 3 elections. Okay, so we have the title for each election, the ID, description, thumbnail, which is the URL coming from Cloudinary, of course, and then we have the candidates and the voters as well. So everything is working exactly as expected. I'll have this in a try catch, and in case of anything, I'll just return next, and then new HTTP error, and then pass in the error. That's enough. Now, to get the elections, I'll say election should be equal to await election model. Come on, election model dot find, just so I can get all the elections. So status of 200 and JSON. I'll pass in the elections. Okay, so if I save this, yep, and come back to Postman, we should be able to get all elections right here. Okay, so I'll send this request and I have all the elections in the database. So there are 3 elections so far and they are all showing up in here. All right, so that is for get all elections. Now we have to be able to actually get a single election as well. And so let's go ahead and do that quickly. And for that, of course, we need the ID of the election that we want to. Of course, I'm going to put this in a try catch. And in case of anything, I'll just return next, new HTTP error, and I'll pass in the error. Okay. Now we need an ID of the election that we are trying to fetch, and that should be coming from the request params. And once we have the ID, then we can say election should be equal to await. Of course, this should be an asynchronous function, right? So we say await election model dot find by ID, and then we pass in the ID. And once we have the election, response status is going to be 200, and JSON, we pass in the election that we just got. Okay, so now if election, come on. So now if I come back to Postman and I'll copy one of these, this is the UNEP presidential election. So I'll copy the ID of that, come back to get election, and in here, if I paste in the ID, I should get the UNEP presidential election right here. Okay, and if I get the ID of a different election, there's the Harvard one, and come back to get election, get election, paste the ID I just copied, then this should give me the Harvard presidential election. I hope that makes sense. So that is for get a single election, get single election, and we should be able to actually get election candidates as well. And although we do not have candidates right now, we can go ahead and actually have this controller down so that we don't have to come back to this controller. Okay, so I'll just return next, new HTTP error. That's in case of any error, and I'll pass in that error. Okay, now we want to get the ID of the election from the request params, and we are going to get all the candidates that belongs to that election. Okay, so I'll say candidates should be equal to await, and I'll actually bring in the candidates model. Okay, and that will be candidates model. So candidates model dot find any candidates with election ID of the ID of their selection. Okay, so every candidate, if you can remember, every candidate model has this election ID. Okay, so the election will be the ID of the election. I hope that makes sense. Of course, I don't know. I just throughout the project, I call this election instead of election ID. So this is actually the election ID, but throughout the project, this is what I call it. So let's just keep it at that. Okay, I don't want to complicate things, but just know that this is the election ID in the candidates model. I hope that makes sense. So this should bring us all the candidates that belongs to a particular election. And once we have that, we can say respond.json and then pass in the candidates that we just got. Okay, of course you can add a status of 200 if you want. Okay, so of course, so far, if we try this, we shouldn't get any candidates because no election has any candidates so far. But we can, of course, go ahead and try this. So, where is it? Get election. Yeah, get candidates of an election. In here, I'm going to paste the ID of one of the elections, and response status is not a function. Wait a minute. Response.status. Okay, and I'll send this one more time, and we should have an empty array. Okay, since all the elections have empty candidates, or there are no candidates for any of the elections so far. Right, now let's continue. I just want to get down with the elections controller, and now I want to get all the voters for an election. Okay, so of course I have to bring in the voter model, but for now I'll just try catch, return, next, new HTTP error, and then pass in the error. Okay, now I'll get the ID of the election. That's from the request params. Should be equal to await election model dot find by ID, and yeah, I'll just use the ID of the election and populate the voters. Okay, since there is that relationship, we can just populate the voters, and that should give us the voters. So I'll say for the response.json, I'll say response.voters. That's what I should send. I'll make the status 200. So this should bring us all the voters that belongs to this particular or a particular election. Okay, so let's go ahead and get voters of election. And so I'll go to get elections and just copy one of the IDs of the elections, and in here I'll just paste that ID and then send, and we get empty array because there are no voters so far. Okay, so that is for get voters of election. Now let's go to update election. We should be able to update an election. To update an election, it's going to be pretty similar to the add election, but let's put this in a try catch, of course. And in a try, we are going to do the check that we had for the add election. Okay, we should make sure the person adding the election is an admin, right? So I'll just check for that in the try. although we do not have this right here, because I'm going to actually have an authentication middleware. Okay, so once we have that authentication middleware, I'm going to uncomment this, and you are going to understand this. Okay, but now let's proceed, and I want to get the ID of the election that we want to update. Okay, so I'll get the ID from the request params, right? Sorry, params. Right, and of course we need a title and a description coming from the request body, and also we need a thumbnail. Okay, but first let's check if we didn't get any, title, or we didn't get any description. So if there is no title or description, we are going to return next new HTTP error, and we'll say filling or failed. I'll do 422. Okay, but once we have a title and a description, we should go ahead and actually make sure we have an image as well. So request.files.thumbnail. If we do have that, then we are going to get the thumbnail from the request files. Now let's check the size. I'll say image size should be less than 1 megabyte. So if the thumbnail size is greater than 1,000,000 bytes or 1 megabyte, then we are returning next new HTTP error, and we will say image size too big, or file size too big, should be less than 1 MB, and let file name be equal to thumbnail, just like we did for the add election. So I'll just copy this right here. So I'll come down here and we'll rename the file. Basically, I've explained this already, so let's proceed. And once we rename the file, we'll say thumbnail.mv. That's move path.join. We need their name. We'll go up into the uploads folder and file name. And we have a callback function here, and that will check if we have any error. And if that is the case, then we are just going to return next new HTTP error, and we'll pass in the error. Okay, but if we did not have any error, then we are going to store image on Cloudinary. So just like we did up top, result, let's await Cloudinary dot uploader dot upload, and then we'll pass in path dot join their name, go up into the uploads folder, and then the file name, and an option here will be resource type, should be image, and yeah, that's all we need right here. Okay, and if everything went well, actually I'll check if Cloudinary storage was actually successful. Okay, so check if Cloudinary storage was successful. So if the result that we go back doesn't have secure URL, then there wasn't a successful storage of the image or the thumbnail on Cloudinary, and therefore you return an HTTP error, and that will say image upload to Cloudinary was not successful. 422. But if everything went well, on Cloudinary, then we are actually going to save the election in the database, okay, or we are going to update the election. So let's await election model dot find by ID and update. The ID is the ID that we got from the params, and we are going to update the title, the description, and the thumbnail. So the thumbnail in this case is going to be the result.secure URL. And once we update the election, we are not going to return the election. We can just say response JSON and election updated successfully, and then 200. I hope that makes sense, guys. This was a lot, but I hope you understand everything. All right, so let's go ahead and actually try updating an election. And I'll just copy, let's go to get elections and copy one of the elections that we have here. So I'll copy the ID, and this is the United Presidential Elections, right? Let's go to update election or edit election right here. You paste in the ID of the election we are trying to update, and we need a title. That's for the body. We choose form data here. So we need title, description, and thumbnail. So for the thumbnail, it's going to be a file. I'll select a file here. I'll just choose this, okay? That's the way. Let's forget about that for now. For the description, I'll say this is the updated description. And for the title, I'll say UENR Presidential Elections 2025, and I'll add updated. Okay, so let's try and then update that election, and we have a problem. What could that be? I'll just check the console here to see what the problem is. All right, so wait, this should be lowercase I, and we should have, since we are checking for an error here, of course we should pass in the error, right? So I think this is it. Now let's go ahead and actually test this out. Now here we confirm data, and the title we need a description and thumbnail. For thumbnail, I don't know how to use thumbnail here. I'll just choose some of these images. Okay, I'll choose the tiger. And for description, I'll say this is the updated description. Okay, and for the title, I'll say UER SRC Presidential Elections 2025. Okay, so remember it was 2024, now it's 2025, and I've added this SRC as well. So this is the body we are sending, and let's hit send right here, and we should succeed. So we get election updated successfully. And now if we go back to get elections, right, if we go back to get elections, I get UENR Presidential Elections 2025. So the old title, the old description, and the old thumbnail is gone. Okay, so if we come to the uploads, there's the thumbnail, the new thumbnail. Okay, and we can even click this to actually see the thumbnail. Wait a minute. I mean, if we open that in a new tab here in the browser, we should have that tiger. Okay, so that's the thumbnail, and I hope you are getting the whole picture here. So that is for update election. Okay, that is how you update an election. And now we have a last controller here before we finish with the elections controller. So with this two, of course, we need to check if this person trying to perform this action is actually an admin. Okay, so return next, new HTTP error. and I'll pass in the error. Okay, but in the try, I'll have this. Right, now let's get the ID of the election we are trying to delete from the request params. Okay, come on, I can't spell params. What is happening? So once we have the ID, I'll just await election model, and I would find by ID and delete. I'll just pass in the ID, and that should do it. Now, once I delete an election, I want to delete all the candidates that belongs to the election as well. Okay, so let's say delete candidates that belong to this selection. All right, so let's await candidate model and delete many. Okay, we are deleting any candidate whose election has ID of this particular election. I hope that makes sense. And then we will send a response.json saying election deleted successfully. 200. Wait a minute. I'll send a status of 200. All right, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. Let's try and then delete some of these selections, and I'll just close this. So let's go to delete selection. So of course, if you want, you can actually go ahead and delete the thumbnail that belongs to that election. Okay, but I'll just keep it simple and just delete the election from the database. Right, so let's come back to Postman and go to, I have this ID, so I'll go to delete election and then pass in the ID of the election I'm trying to delete. And now if I send this request, I get election deleted successfully. Okay, and so if I come back here, remember this is the election we just deleted. So if I get all the elections, we should have only 2 elections so far. Okay, of course, if I go ahead and try deleting the Harvard presidential elections as well, election deleted successfully. If I come back to get all elections, I'll have only 1, that's the Legon presidential elections. Okay, so of course I can go ahead and delete this as well, but you get the idea. All right, so that is all for the elections controller. Okay, that is all for the elections controller. And now let's move on to, actually, you know what, I should have the authentication middleware. Okay, so that we make sure any user that is trying to add an election or remove or update an election is actually the admin. Okay, so let's create that in the middleware folder. Where is that? I should have a middleware folder right here. So let's create a file called auth middleware.js. For most of the requests that are sent to the API, we will be expecting a token, okay, in the headers or in the header. And so that token is what we are going to use to check if this person is authenticated. And that is also what we are going to actually check if this person is an admin. Okay, so you can be authenticated, all right, but that doesn't mean you can perform all the actions in the application. Okay, you have to be an admin to actually perform some of the actions. All right, so let's bring in, let me actually go up here, and I'm going to bring in JWT, that is JSON Web Token. Yeah, and I'm going to bring in HTTP error as well, and that should be coming from, let's go up into middleware and then the error middleware. Wait, is that it? That should be the model, right? Oh my god, even here I don't have that. Wait, did I have that in the voter or the voters controller? HTTP error, that should be coming from the model. Okay, so yeah, that should be coming from the model. Perfect. So in the elections, we have that, and here this should be coming from the, we are currently in the auth middleware. Okay, so this should be coming from the models and the error model. Okay, so we have these two, and let's go ahead and let's have the auth middleware. It is going to be asynchronous, and of course we need requests, we need response, and then we need next, right? So I'll say authorization should be equal to request.headers.authorization. Okay, or in case we make it lowercase, then we are getting request headers and then authorization. So if authorization, if it is true and authorization starts with bearer, and we are making sure it starts with bearer because we are going to be sending the request from the client. Okay, so if the authorization starts with bearer, then we are going to get a token from the authorization. So we say authorization.split, and then we are splitting by a space. Okay, and once we split by a space, the last part of the splitting should be the token, okay, or the second part. I hope that makes sense, and you should understand this. And so I'll come to the login and just log in real quick. Okay, we actually have a user logged in here. So this is going to be the token, but for each request we will have bearer in front of it and then a space. Okay, so when we split by a space, we are going to get the second element in that array after the split, and that should give us this token. I hope that makes sense. All right, so let's come back here. Once we have the token, then we are going to go ahead and make sure that token is actually verified. Okay, so let's verify that token, and we are going to verify it by putting in the token here and the secret that we used to generate the token. So remember that was JWT secret from the .env. Okay, and then we have this callback function which will take in the error and the info that is in the token. Okay, so if we have any error, then of course this person shouldn't go forward in logging in or doing any action in the application. So HTTP error, and we will say unauthorized invalid token 403. And if everything went well, then request the user should be equal to info. Okay, and if you can remember, this request the user is what we are using in the election controller to actually check. So I'm going to actually uncomment. I'm actually going to uncomment this out, and you can see that request the user is what we are using to actually check if that user is admin. Okay, so remember, during the login, that's what we used to generate the token right here in the login. Where is it? So during the generation of the token, that's what we passed in. Okay, so we have ID right here, and then we have is admin. Okay, so we are getting the is admin from this request.user because it will be inside of this object. I hope that makes sense. So once we have request.user, we're just going to pass on to the next middleware. But then if we do not have this bearer token, that should be the else that we have down here. Then we are going to return next new HTTP error, and we will say unauthorized no token. Okay, and the code is going to be 403, meaning forbidden. Right, so let's go on and actually export this. auth middleware. And now, before we perform any of the protected actions, we should make sure that's in the routes. Okay, so let's go to the routes. Before we add an election, we should make sure we pass through the auth middleware first before we get to the controller that is going to perform that action. I hope that makes sense. All right, so let's bring in auth middleware, and that should be coming from the middleware and then auth middleware. Okay, so to add an election, we need to authenticate first, and that is going to be for getting election, getting a single election, removing election, updating election, getting election candidates, and then getting election voters as well. Now, to get a voter here as well, we should use the authentication. Okay, we should authenticate first. Now, for the candidate, we are going to do same. So wherever you want to authenticate first before we perform the controller is where we have the middleware. Okay, right. So I'll get back to the election controller and make sure I uncomment all those, all those all those checks that I commented. Okay, so if the admin for the request user is false, then we are going to return. Okay, so the user shouldn't be able to perform any action, that is update the selection, if the user is not an admin or the voter is not an admin. I hope that makes sense. Same here as well for the delete, and I think that's it. Okay, so that is it for the entire elections controller, and that's it for the authentication as well. So we can close that. And so if I come back to this and try to add an election, first of all I have to log in, and so let's go to login. And currently we are logged in as Achiever. Okay, so it should work if we try to add an election, but I'm going to log in as John Doe, and the password is John123. So let's log in as John Doe. And what could be the problem? Okay, I'll come back here, and okay, what could be the problem? HTTP has already been declared. Really? Oh yeah, sorry guys. Yeah, it's already been declared, but I messed that up. It was inside the comment, so I didn't really pay attention to it. Okay, so yeah, everything should be working, and now we can go on and log in as John Doe. So I'm going to copy the token of John Doe right here. I'm going to copy that and then try to add an election signed in as John Doe. Okay, so I'm signed in as John Doe, and I'm going to add an election. Now come to authorization here and then choose bearer token right here. So once you choose bearer token, you are going to paste in the token of John Doe. Okay, so I'll try, and again, only an admin can perform this action. Okay, so I cannot add an election if I'm not an admin. And in this case, the only admin that we have is achiever@gmail.com. So achiever@gmail.com is going to sign in, and I'm going to go ahead and send. Okay, and then I'm going to copy the token, this Achievers token right here. And now if I go ahead to add the election, I'm going to paste in the token, and for body, now remember we only have one election because we deleted the ones that we created earlier. We created 3, but we deleted them all. And so now we only have Legon presidential elections, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and add UNER presidential elections 2024. Let's go ahead and do that. And since Achiever is an admin, he should be able to actually perform this action. And if I go ahead and actually fetch elections unauthorized node token, of course I should have a token that's a bearer token. So I'm going to go ahead and paste. And if I send a request, I should have 2 elections. Okay, so we have the UNER presidential elections that we just created, and then we have the Legon one as well. So the authorization is also working. You have to, of course, sign in to perform some actions. All right, so that's all for the authorization or the authentication. And so let's move on to the candidates controller. Okay, so I'm going to close the Cloudinary. I don't need it. I'm going to close the index.js as well. And let's move on to the candidate controller real quick. Of course, we should be able to add candidates. So that's the first thing we are going to do here. This should be pretty similar to the add election. So I'll just bring everything in here, okay? And paste it. Right? And actually for the check for if the user is an admin or not, I'll bring that in here as well. And I'll first have the try catch. Of course, these are all going to be asynchronous. Okay, these are all going to be asynchronous. So in the try, I'll paste that check if the user is an admin or not. And in case of any error in the catch, I'll return that. So new HTTP error, and I'll just pass in the error. Okay, but everything should be asynchronous, so I'll just copy this async and then have that in front of all the controllers. We have 4 controllers here so far. Perfect. We need to make sure we are getting the full name, the motto, and then the current election that we want to add this candidate to. Okay, so I'll be getting the full name, the motto of the candidate, and then the current election this candidate is going to be added to, and that should be coming from the request body. And we should check if we have any empty field. Okay, so if the full name is in there or the motto is in there, then we are going to say fill in all fields. So we return next new HTTP error, and then we say fill in all fields. So that'll be 422, right? But if we have everything in the field, then we are going to get the image. Or let's actually check if we don't have any image. Okay, so if request files image is in there, then we are going to have an issue. So we return next new HTTP error and say choose an image 422. Once we have the image, then we are going to go ahead and actually check for the size of the image. Okay, so let's get the image from the request files and let's check for the size. And so if image.size is greater than 1,000,000 bytes, then we return next new HTTP error. Come on, new HTTP error, and we'll say image should be less than 1 megabyte, or image size should be less than 1 megabyte. Okay, so let's go on, and actually right after this check, we are going to do what we did in the election. So we are going to rename the image, and once we rename it, then we'll go ahead and actually upload this into the uploads folder here, and then also push it to Cloudinary. I hope that makes sense. And once we rename it here, of course we should bring in UUID. Okay, we have it here already. We have Cloudinary here already as well. So we can actually go ahead and upload this into the uploads folder, and that will be image.move. That's MV. Let's bring in path. I hope we have path here as well. Okay, we do. So path.join their name. So the current directory that we are in, but we want to go up into the uploads folder. Okay, and we add the file name. And once we have that, we have to check if there are any errors. Okay, so we are going to have a callback function here and check if there is any errors. If so, then we will return next and say new HTTP error and then pass in the error. Okay, but if there was no issues uploading the image to the uploads folder, then we can go ahead and actually store the image to Cloudinary or in Cloudinary or on Cloudinary, whatever. All right, so let's go ahead and say results should be equal to await. And the reason why I used a sync here was because I'm going to be awaiting something from Cloudinary. Okay, this is going to be asynchronous. So Cloudinary dot uploader dot upload, and we have to use the same path that we have here and then paste it in our upload. And once everything goes well, we can go ahead. Actually, I'm going to have resource type to be image. All right, now I want to check if we had any issues uploading the image to Cloudinary. If we had any issues, then result secure is going to be false. Okay, so if result secure is false, then we are going to return next new HTTP error and say could not or couldn't upload image to Cloudinary. All right, but if everything went well, then we are going to add the candidate to DB or the database. All right, so I'll say new, or let new candidate be equal to, let's await candidate model dot create. Now we need a full name, motto, and then I think the default is actually 0, right? Let's check that real quick. That's the model. Sorry, that's the candidate model. That should be vote count. Okay. So vote count. It's actually 0 by default, so I don't even have to add that. Where is it? Candidate model. Come on, man. Yeah, vote count default 0. Okay, so I'll just close this. I don't have to add that because it has a default of 0. I'll have the image, and wait a minute. Okay, so we'll have the image, which is going to be result secure URL, and then we'll have the election. Okay, in this case, the election is going to be the current election. Once we create the candidate, we should make sure the relationship is also established well in the elections. Now, for each election from the model, you can see that for each election, sorry, we have a candidate array here. Okay, so once we add a candidate in the candidates controller, we should start a session and then push that candidate ID in this array. I hope that makes sense. So that is what we are going to do. We are going to start a session to actually make this happen. So first of all, let's get the election. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I think this comment itself explanatory. So I'll say election should be equal to await election model, and find by ID. We'll put in the current election. Okay, so once we have that, we are going to go ahead and create a session. Let's await Mongoose. Of course, we should bring in Mongoose. So Mongoose dot start session to create a section. Let's start transaction here, and we are going to await new candidate dot save, and we'll pass in session, which is going to be the session that we just started. Okay, and here we will say election dot candidates, and we are going to push the new candidates that we just created. Okay, so push the candidate that we just created, and we will await election dot save, and we'll pass in the session that we started. All right, and once all is done, you will say session transaction on that. All right, so that is it. And lastly, we'll just say candidate added successfully of 201.json, and then yeah, perfect. So I hope this is clear. I hope you understood this. So once we create a candidate, that's not all. We have to go ahead and actually add the candidate to the candidates array in the election model. I hope that makes sense. So that's why we have to get the election. We have to start a session and then put that new candidate that we just created. We have to push that in the candidates array in the election model, right? So that is the relationship we have to establish, and that is also going to help us a lot along the way, creating these kind of relationships. So this comment, I don't know, get election and push candidate to election. Maybe it's self-explanatory, but yeah, my explanation is good here. And now we should be able to actually add a candidate. Okay, so let's go ahead and wait a minute. Yeah, let's go ahead and actually try this. Let's try and add a candidate. So to add a candidate, let's go to the body and form. We need a name. Was it full name or name? I'm not sure. We need a full name. So full name. We need motto of the candidates, and then we need an image. And lastly, we need is it a current election or selected? Yeah, current election. Current election. Okay. Now the current election, so far, how many elections we have? So far we have 2 elections, and I'll copy the ID of the Legon election, right? And I'll paste that here in the current elections. For the image, I'll choose anyone as the candidate. I'll choose this lady right here. And for the motto, this is the candidate motto, or I'll say this is the first candidate's motto. And for the name, I'll say Diana I. Now, of course, we should be logged in, and we should be signed in as the admin before we can actually add a candidate. So I'm going to copy the token of Ernest Achiever, come to authorization here, and bearer token, I'm going to paste in the token. Okay, so now if we send this request, thumbnail is not defined. Okay, yep, that was my bad. I should have just copied. So image, that's how I called it. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Right, so let's do this one once again. Okay, so we get candidate added successfully. So now if I go to get elections, now you can see that Legon presidential elections has one candidate, and that should be the the candidates we just added. And if we come to our database and refresh the page, we should have the candidates collection, and in that collection we should actually have one candidate. That's Diana I, the candidate we just created. Okay, so we have one candidate and we have Diana I. Okay, of course the image should be uploaded. So candidate 7, that was the image of Diana I, and everything is working. Okay, so as you can see, the election the candidate belongs to should be the Legon presidential elections. Okay, so the ID ends with 8A8D1. If we come to the elections page, the elections collection, you can see that that is actually this election. And as you can see, since we have that relationship, you can see that the candidate's ID is also here in the candidates array in this election. I hope that makes sense. All right, so of course you can go ahead and actually add more candidates to the different selections that we have so far. But of course, if we try to, I'm going to log in as John Doe. And if we try to, so john@gmail.com, and the password is john123. I'm just going to get John Doe's token and try to add an a candidate. So the bearer token is going to be John Doe's token. Now the body, we are going to keep the current selection as the Legon election. I'm just going to choose a different candidate here, and I'll call this person Daniel Vigno, and I'll say this is the second candidate's motto. Right now, let's try and add this candidate, and we get only an admin can perform this action. Okay, so everything is working exactly as expected, guys. Everything is working exactly as expected. And so we should go on to actually be able to get candidates and all that. Okay, let's go on to perform the other CRUD functions that we have here. All right, so let's be able to get candidates. So to get a candidate, of course, you need the ID of the candidate, and that should be coming from the request params. Right, let's actually have this in a try catch. And in case we have any issues, new HTTP error, and then we say, let me just pass in the error. Okay, so let's move on, and once we have that, we can just go ahead. The candidate is going to be await, and let's get candidates from the model, and let's go ahead and find the candidate by ID. Once we have the candidates, we can just response JSON candidate, and that's it. Okay, this is very simple. And so we can go ahead and wait a minute, I have one candidate so far, so I'll just copy the candidate's ID from here, come back here, go to get candidate, and then paste that. Okay, unauthorized. Of course, we should log in, and for get candidates, we don't need to be an admin, although you have to be logged in first. And so let's get back here, authorization, bearer token, and I'm going to paste the token. Right, so now we should be able to get our candidate. We should be able to delete candidates as well. So let's go to the controller and be able to delete candidates. You have this in a try catch, of course. New HTTP error. Yep. And I'll just pass in the error here. So, all right, now, of course, we need to first make sure this person is an admin to be able to perform this action, right? So I'll just copy this, come down, and then paste it in here, right? Once the person is an admin, then we can go ahead and actually, now I'm going to get the ID of the candidates we want to delete, right? So that will be from the request params, and I'll let current candidate be equal to await candidate model, and let's find by ID, and I'll just pass in the ID that I got. Now I'll also populate the election. Okay, I'll populate the election. Remember, every candidate has that election, which is the election ID. I'll populate that just so I get the election this candidate belongs to, right? Because we are going to use some session here as well. Okay, so I'll check if current candidate does not exist. So I'll do does not. If so, then I'll return next new HTTP error, and I'll say code not or couldn't delete candidate, and I'll do 422 actually. But if we actually got the candidate, then we are going to go ahead and actually delete the candidate from the election collection right here. So for every election, we have that candidates array. Okay, so we are going to delete the candidates from here, and we will do that before we actually delete the candidates from the candidates collection itself. I hope that makes sense. All right, so let's go ahead and I'll start a session here, and of course I'll wait mongoose dot start session. I'll start transaction. Let's await current candidate dot delete one, and I'll just pass in session, and that's the session that we just started. And I'll say current candidate dot election dot candidate dot pool, and I'm going to pull out that current candidate. Now let's await current candidate dot election dot save, pass in the session, and lastly we will say await session dot commit transaction. Once we have all this, then we can go ahead and say response.json candidate deleted successfully. Right now I can go ahead and actually have a status of 200, and that should be it. Okay, so now if we go ahead and try deleting the candidates that we have so far, delete candidates right here. So we have to put in the ID of the candidate, and of course I need to be logged in as achiever. If I try to perform this action using John Doe's token, that shouldn't work. So let's just try that bearer token. I'll just paste in the token and then try. Only an admin can perform this action. Okay, so of course I have to come back and then log in as achiever. So achiever 123, and then let's try. Sorry, I have to log in. Sorry. I have to log in and get the token of achiever. Wait, is this the token? Yeah. So I'll copy the token, come to delete candidates, and I'll paste that in. All right, so now we should get candidate deleted successfully. Okay, and so if I come back to actually get a candidate, we should have now. So there are no candidates. Okay, now if I come here and refresh, I'll just refresh this. Okay, in our candidates collection, you can see there are no candidates. And if we come to the elections, remember that was a Legon candidate. And now you can see that there is no candidate here in the Legon election as well. I hope that makes sense. So using the session, we can actually do some really cool stuff when it comes to relationship between collections. All right, so that is for delete candidates. And now we should be able to update candidates as well, which is the last controller that we have. So let's quickly work on this. All right, so of course this is going to be inside the try catch as usual. And I'll just pass in the error. Right, and in here we need one, the candidate ID. Okay, the candidates we are trying to vote for. Now this update candidate, but it's the same as vote candidate, right? We are trying to vote for a candidate, and there is a patch request. That's why I call it update candidate. Okay, but there's actually a vote candidate, right? So to vote for a candidate, you need the ID of the candidate you are trying to vote for, and also you need the ID of the election in which that candidate belongs to. I hope that makes sense. All right, so the candidate's ID will be coming from the params. So let's get the ID, and I'm actually going to give it an alias of candidate ID, okay? And that should be coming from the request params. What is going on? I can't spell param straightforward without putting in a semicolon. So let's go on and let's get the current voter ID. Okay, that's the person trying to vote, and we'll get the selected election as well. Okay, so to vote you need the candidate's ID, the voter's ID, and then the election ID. These two should be coming from the request body, by the way. Let's go ahead and get the candidates you are trying to vote for. I'll call this candidate. Let's await candidate model dot find by ID, and I'll pass in the candidate's ID. The reason why I'm getting the candidate is because I want to increase the candidate's vote count. Okay, so I'll say new vote count should be equal to the candidate's dot vote count plus 1. I just want to increase it by 1. Okay, and once we have that, let's go ahead and update candidate's vote. Okay, so I'll await candidates model dot find by ID and update. I'll pass in the candidate's ID, and I want to update the vote count, and now it should be equal to the new vote count, and I'll say new should be true, a colon of course. All right, so below this we have to start a session. So let's go ahead and start a session. Let's await Mongoose dot start session. Let's start transaction on this session that we just started, and let's get the current voter. I'll select voter be equal to await voter model. I don't know if we even have the voter model, so let's go ahead and bring in the voter model real quick. I'll duplicate this voter model. Perfect. All right, so let's bring in the voter model, and let's find by ID. I'll pass in the current voter ID. So once we have the voter, we will say await voter.save, and then we'll pass in the session, and then we'll get the selected election as well. I'll let election be equal to await selection. Come on, election model dot find by ID, and I'll pass in the selected election that we got from the request body, and the election voters, I'll push the new voter. Okay, the person that just voted, and that's the reason why we had to get him from the database, okay, so that we can push him to the voters array inside of the elections collection. I hope that makes sense. Remember, every election has right here. So every election has this voters array. That is why we have to start a session to push that current voter into this elections array or into the voters array. I hope that makes sense. All right, so yeah, we'll say voted elections, and we are also going to push the current election, okay, that we just fetched. I hope that also makes sense. So for every voter, we have voted elections array right here, and we are pushing the current election into that voted election array, right? So once we have this, we can await election.save, and then we save that session, and then I'll do same for the voter. Let's await voter.save, and then session will be the session that we are working in, and lastly we will commit. Okay, so session.commit transaction, right? So the response status here 200 JSON, I will say vote casted successfully. I hope you are following. Okay, so there's what you have to do to actually vote in an election. Start session for relationship between voters and election. Between voter and election, yeah. All right, so I think that is it. We can actually go ahead and vote. So we need current voter ID, the selected election, and the candidate's ID from the params. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually try this. So far, I don't have any candidate, so I have to go ahead and add a candidate. I should be logged in as Achiever, of course. Okay, so I'm going to copy this token, come to add candidates, and I'll pass in that token. Okay, let's add this candidate. Okay, so candidates added successfully, and of course I should make sure that it's actually here in the database. Okay, so we have that candidate. I'm going to copy the ID of this candidate because we are trying to vote. We need to put that in the params. So that is going to wait, that should be vote candidate. That's a patch request. Okay, so I'm going to put that in the params, and of course in the body we need the current voter. Let's make sure, yeah, current voter ID and selected election. We need those ID here as well, those IDs. So current voter ID and then selected election. Okay, so for the selected election, which election should we vote in? I'll vote in the Legon presidential election, so I'll paste in that ID. And for the current voter ID, I'll choose John Doe. Okay, so John Doe is going to vote here. Okay, so we have all these. Now let's go ahead and vote. And unauthorized, no token. Of course, we have to be logged in. So of course, let's log in as John Doe. I'll change the email here to be john@gmail.com. The password john123. Okay, so let's go ahead. And now, of course, we should come here and authorization. bearer token, and then paste in that token. Okay, so let's go ahead and vote, and boom, vote casted successfully. That's an error. It should be vote casted successfully. So we have been able to vote, right? And so if we come here and we check or even refresh, for now the array for voted elections is 0, or it's empty. It's empty, but once I refresh, we should have an election ID in there. Okay, so we have one election, and that should be the Legon election. Okay, so this ID is the Legon election ID. Okay, and now if we come to the elections collection, we should have one voter. Okay, so the voters array here has one voter, and that should be John Doe's ID. I hope that makes sense. So that is it for the entire API, and I just hope you understood everything, guys. Yo guys, something just caught my attention while editing the videos, right? So I think when we get to the browse, you can see that we go through the auth middleware before we get to the vote candidates. Okay, and so with the auth middleware, if you look at this, you can see that we have request user, which is an object that has some information, and the information is the payload from the verified token. That is the ID and the admin. Okay, if you can remember, whenever you log in, that's the token you are sent. You are being sent right here. The admin, the admin and the ID of you, the user logging in. I hope that makes sense. So we have request.user right here before we even get to the controller. That is the vote candidate. So in the vote candidate controller, instead of getting current voter ID from the request body, we can directly get that from the request.user. I hope that makes sense. So here we are fetching the voter from the database, and instead of current voter ID, we are going to use request.user.id. Okay, and I think that's more clean. All right, so now what we have to do is to actually connect our front-end application, that's the React application, to this Node Express API that we just created.